If you're a beginner, crafting in Path of Exile 2 can be actually, in my opinion, more confusing than PoE 1. Why is that? Well, because a lot of things are left up to interpretation, and a lot of information is actually missing from the player and how they understand and what things actually mean. Let's go ahead and start off with some really simple basic things though, and let's talk about currency, because currency is incredibly important. Sorry for the flashbang. This is an ultimate mana flask. It is a normal item. As you can see, it is grayed out completely. These orbs that we have here, transmutation, augmentation, alchemy, regal, chaos, vol, exalted, these are all types of currency that are used to in fact craft onto your items and or gear. This is a normal item. We're going to go ahead and turn it into a magic item now with an orb of transmutation. Boom, it is now blue and it has an affix modifier. 56% increased recovery rate. Not too bad. Let's go ahead and add another affix onto it with an orb of augmentation. And now we get 27% chance to gain a charge when you kill an enemy. Let's say I don't like this setup whatsoever. There are a couple of things we can do. If the item is something we really want to keep, we can try and roll a chaos orb. We'll remove a random modifier and augment a rare item with a new one. This is not a rare item, so we can't really use it. In my opinion, though, if you have items that you cannot use or you don't like the modifiers and you don't want to spend the extra money on them, take them to the reforging bench, craft 3 of them, put them in, reforge it for something else, and then go from there. You can also go to Ketsuli in the end game and disenchant the item for a bit of a shard. You can do all kinds of things with this game and then try and go through and do what you can to either make currency back or just kind of start all over. So let's talk about bases, because we already talked about rarity, which was again normal, magic, and rare. Bases are incredibly important, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that right now. This is an advanced horned crown. It's 102 armor and 37 energy shield. Not bad, right? Don't worry about the tiers. We'll talk about that in a moment. This is an expert horned crown. 134 armor and 46 energy shield. Simply by having expert over advanced, we've gained more energy shield and more armor. If you want to begin to craft onto items, my suggestion is to in fact try to craft onto items that are expert already, rather than trying to craft onto something that is just either non-tagged or advanced. Why? Because again, if you're going to be spending all this currency that you're looking for all the time, then you want to make sure you spend it in the right place. So how do we know what affixes are going to be applied, and how can I sort of predict what's going to be happening to my item when I use my currency onto it? With that, let's go to PoE2 database. Now, PoE2 database is a lot of fun if you like a lot of numbers. And me, I like a lot of numbers. That horned crown that we found is actually part of a specific set of stats. It's not strength, it's not dex, it's not int, it's actually strength and intelligence. As you can see here on the required item, it is 49 strength required and 49 int required. So that means in PoEDB, you're going to look for items that have the required attributes of strength and intelligence. As you can see, we're going to click it right here, and here are the prefixes and here are the suffixes that are going to be applicable to this item. Now, the interesting part is this was a tier 3 item. And what does tier mean? Well, there are tiers. There's item level. There's also weights. Now, PoE2DB doesn't have the weights yet, and on top of that, the weighting is going to be changed in the actual upcoming patch. What weighting means is just basically what is the percent chance you're going to have to roll that specific affix. And tier basically means, do we have enough of those tiers for that affix to roll? We have a tier 3 modifier, which means that if we were to roll on that helmet, there are 3 tiers of accuracy and increased light radius, which means that if we were to roll accuracy and light radius, we would get the 3rd tier. That's how that works. Here's another example. We could get chaos res as a suffix. The good thing is, though, we would not get tier 1 or tier 2. we would start at tier 3 of eviction. So you could then go from tier 3, 4, 5, and 6. The great thing is about this, if you have any affixes that are tier 2, they would immediately be null and void out of that actual mod pool, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. However, though, there are other tiers as well, like max life. This has 10 tiers. We would actually start on the 3rd tier here. So the minimum tier we would get for max life on a prefix is going to be 30 to 39. We could also get lucky and get higher, about tier 8 or tier 9 or even tier 10. But the thing is, what you want to look for is, where is the starting point of all of this? Let's go ahead and have some fun and see if we're going to be right, though. Here's our identify scroll. Here's our tier 3 helmet. We've identified it. We've got 32% increased armor and energy shield, 31 max life, and 174 mana. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what we got. If we look at max life, here it is, Sanguine, 31 max life. We are directly in tier 3. So everything seems to be just the way it is. Now, because we've already rolled those specific affixes, we can basically cross them out and see what we're going to be getting next, and then figure out what is the next tier up what we're looking at. We already have armor and energy shield. We already have life. We already have mana. We already have cold res and lightning res. So there are quite a few other modifiers that we can get in either a prefix or a suffix. And if you can see here where it says tier 4 and you have 2 actual mods together, that's because that modifier is placed together. So it's not 2 separate tiers, it's 1. As you can see, the bracket is larger. So we have 1 open prefix and 1 open suffix. Let's slam an exalt and see what we get. We got 18 to strength. Hey, real quick, I just want to interject myself. I forgot to add this in the video when I uploaded it. Just because an item is identified as a tier 2 or higher, it does not mean that it is always going to be that tier or higher when you add an exalted orb. The level of tiers for the affixes, whether prefix or suffix, only apply when you identify the item for the first time. Once you start adding exalted orbs into the mix, the prefix or suffix that is being added could in fact be of any tier that is available for you, whether it's tier 1 or to the maximum tier, whether 10 or 11 or whatever it's going to be at that moment in time. So just because you have an item that is tier 4, it does not guarantee that every other affix that you roll onto it with an exalted orb will be tier 4 or higher. You may get a tier 1 or even tier 2 or tier 3. Just be aware that when you use an exalted orb, basically anything is on the table. Let's look at what we have right here. We have an advanced horn crown, an expert horn crown, and an expert horn crown as well. If you try to reforge these 3 helms, it's not going to work. Why? Because you have 2 experts and 1 advanced. Trying to reforge these 3 will in fact not apply the reforge button because you do not have a 3rd expert. So when you're trying to reforge items, make sure that they are also not just the same rarity, but also as well the same kind of gear, whether normal, expert, or advanced. You also have to make sure that they are in fact the same kind of item. Even if they were different helmets, it wouldn't work either. What you want to do is look for pieces of gear that fit your class specifically. Here's a good example. My mercenary witch hunter has a lot of strength and a lot of dex, not that much intelligence, not very smart. What you want to look for on the ground are pieces of gear that have strength and dexterity and can fit inside of that bracket of 121 to 128 that I have here for my attribute points. Here we can see that I have a pair of boots that have strength and dex for their requirements, which will work for me. Here's another one for just dex, which does work as it falls under my total attribute points. And of course, strength and dex as well. You can clearly see what's not going to work because it's highlighted in red. But when you're looking at things on the ground, besides having a loot filter being applied, which I'll do in another video as well. So I took a pair of boots and I dropped them on the floor and we can see 61 intelligence. I can't wear that piece of gear, but it does have a socket, so I'll take it to then salvage it for something else. A lot of the gear in this game is on the ground. You're going to be picking up quite a bit of it. So even if you see rares that you cannot wear yourself, you can in fact salvage those rares for regal orbs and then use that later on, or at least the shards of them. And that's going to be a good way of getting you into the kind of gear that you need, so that way you are prepared moving forward. And that's the beginning way of crafting. What you want to do is, again, find any piece of gear that you have on the floor, use that to then craft up from transmutation, augmentation, regal it to make it a rare, and then use your exalts to slam onto it as well. As you are getting better with your gear and doing more with it, you can in fact do a lot of fun things. And one of those things too is to increase the quality. Now, increasing quality of your gear is very important because it'll increase the base stats of that piece of gear. Like I said, expert being the best, if you can increase it by 20%, you should do it. Armor scraps are a good way of doing that, as well as blacksmith whetstones. You can get either of these when you see a weapon that is superior or a piece of armor that is superior, and it'll be on the ground that will say that specifically. So again, even if you can't wear that piece of gear, or if you're not able to in fact equip it or craft onto it, you can salvage that piece of gear for this type of currency to increase the base stats. Here's an armor scrap we're going to test out on these boots. 1% increase, evasion rating went up, 2% went up again, 4%, 178. As we add more quality, the evasion rating increases, making it a better piece of gear. So again, the higher the base for expert, the more you increase it overall. Then we can, of course, add a socket to it if we wanted to, and then apply any sort of resistance or anything like that with either specific kinds of runes that you find on the floor. Remember that weapons and armor are vastly different. So if you apply this rune onto a weapon, it's going to have a different effect than if you would apply it onto a piece of armor. So for a weapon, increased physical damage. For a piece of armor, it would be evasion and energy shield. Finally, corrupting. Now, Vol orbs are a lot of fun, and a really favorite word of GGG is something called unpredictable or unpredictably. They love that word for some reason. Voling should be done at the very, very last stage, when you've already added all your quality, when you've added all of your runes, when you've added all of your sockets, and you've added all of your prefixes and suffixes, and even implicits probably. Voling will change this piece of gear completely, or do nothing at all, or destroy it. Yeah, it'll do one of those things. So let's go ahead and vol this. And we got nothing. It didn't do anything. Welcome to Path of Exile. That's kind of how things go. Sometimes, though, when you vol a piece of gear, you can get a lot of really great stats. In fact, a lot of my old gear and my crossbows were put in this specific space and this kind of affixes because I applied a vol orb to them. You should only vol orb when you are trying to get a side grade, which means it is not a guaranteed upgrade, but it is something that you are willing to risk and could possibly get you something better. You should also practically almost always vol orb uniques because it will in fact increase or decrease the actual stats on that piece of gear by quite a big margin. We can talk about that another day too as well. Just talk about vol orb specifically and do that kind of thing. So if you have a unique, you definitely want to go ahead and vol orb that, especially if you're not going to wear it, because it will in fact use a divine orb, which we'll talk about another time too. This is more of a beginner video, and then do a lot of crazy stuff on top of that as well. Is there a way to craft where you can almost guarantee what will happen? Yes, and that will be with omens, and that will be in a later video when I have more omens, because I am playing solo self-found. But this should be a good way for you to begin your journey into crafting. It's going to be a lot of RNG, it's going to be a lot of reforging, and the more that you play and the more that you juice your maps and you play throughout the campaign, and you see more pieces of gear that fit your affixes and even stats in game, you will then be able to craft onto them using these specific orbs and then regal them to then have a better piece of gear as you play the game and get into the end game and even start to upgrade yourself even further. Hopefully this will be a good place of start for you. And of course, I'll put the link to PoE2DB in the description down below so you can see everything else the website has for you as well. If you want to see more of this kind of content, subscribe. We are doing more how-to videos and even more gameplay and live streams every Friday night here on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a great one, and I'll see you next time.